Anne Frank, bottom of page 113. Thursday, July 29th, 1943. Dearest Kitty, Miss Van Daan, Dussel, and I were doing the dishes, and I was extremely quiet. This is very unusual for me, and they were sure to notice, so in order to avoid any questions, I quickly racked my brains for a neutral topic. I thought the book Henry from across the street might fit the bill, but I couldn't have been more wrong. If Miss Van Daan doesn't jump down my throat, Mr. Dussel does. It all boiled down to this. Mr. Dussel had recommended the book to Margot and me as an example of excellent writing. We thought it was anything but that. The little boy had been portrayed well, but as for the rest, the less said, the better. I mentioned something to the effect while we were doing the dishes, and Dussel launched into a veritable tirade. How can you possibly understand the psychology of a man? That of a child isn't so difficult, but you're far too young to read a book like that. Even a 20-year-old man would be unable to comprehend it. So why did he go out of his way to recommend it to Margot and me? Miss Van Daan and Dussel continued their harangue. You know way too much about things you're not supposed to. You've been brought up all wrong. Later on, when you're older, you won't be able to enjoy anything anymore. You'll say, oh, I read that 20 years ago in some book. You better hurry if you want to catch a husband or fall in love, since everything is bound to be a disappointment to you. You already know all there is to know in theory, but in practice, that's another story. Can you imagine how I felt? I astonished myself by calmly replying, you may think I haven't been raised properly, but many people would disagree. They apparently believe that good child-rearing includes trying to pit me against my parents, since that's all they ever do. And not telling a girl my age about grown-up subjects is fine. We can all see what happens when people are raised that way. At that moment, I could have slapped them both for poking fun at me. I was beside myself with rage, and if I only knew how much longer we had to put up with each other's company, I'd start counting the days. Miss Van Daan's a fine one to talk. She sets up an example, all right, a bad one. She's known to be exceedingly pushy, egotistical, cunning, calculating, and perpetually dissatisfied. And to that, vanity and colloquialism, and there's no question about it, she's a thoroughly despicable person. I could write an entire book about Madame Van Daan, and who knows, maybe someday I will. Anyone can put on a charming exterior when they want to. Miss Van Daan is friendly to strangers, especially men, so it's easy to make a mistake when you first get to know her. Mother thinks that Miss Van Daan is too stupid for words. Margot that she's too unimportant. Pym that she's too ugly, literally and figuratively. And after a long observation, I've never prejudiced at the beginning. I've come to the conclusion that she's all three of the above and lots more besides. She's had so many bad traits. Why should I single just out one of them? Yours, Anne. P.S. Will the reader please take into consideration that the story was written before the writer's fury had cooled? Tuesday, August 3rd, 1943. Dearest Kitty, things are going well on the political front. Italy has banned the fascist party. The people are fighting the fascists in many ways. Even the army has joined the fight. How can a country like that continue to wage war against England? Our beautiful radio was taken away last week. Dussel was very angry at Mr. Kruger for returning it in on the appointed day. Dussel is slipping lower and lower in my estimation, and he's already below zero. Whatever he says about politics, history, geography, or anything else is so ridiculous that I hardly dare repeat it. Hitler will fade from history. The harbor in Rotterdam is bigger than the one in Hamburg. The English are idiots for not taking the opportunity to bomb Italy to smithereens, etc., etc. We just had a third air raid. I decided to grit my teeth and practice being courageous. Miss Van Daan, the one who always said, let them fall, and better to end with a bang than not to end at all, is the most cowardly among us. She was shaking like a leaf this morning and even burst into tears. She was comforted by her husband, with whom she recently declared a truce after a week of squabbling. I nearly got sentimental at the sight. Mouchy has now proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that having a cat has disadvantages as well as advantages. The whole house is crawling with fleas, and it's getting worse each day. Mr. Clyman sprinkled yellow powder in every nook and cranny, but the fleas haven't taken the slightest notice. It's making us all very jittery. We're forever imagining a bite on our arms and legs or other parts of our bodies. So we leap up and do a few exercises since it gives us an excuse to take a better look at our arms or necks. But now we're paying the price for having had so little physical exercise. We're so stiff we can hardly turn our heads. The real calisthenics fell by the wayside long ago. Yours, Anne. Wednesday, August 4th, 1943. Dearest Kitty, now that we've been in hiding for a little over a year, you know a great deal about our lives. Still, I can't possibly tell you everything, since it's all so different compared to ordinary times and ordinary people. Nevertheless, to give you a closer look into our lives from time to time, I'll describe an ordinary day. I'll start with the evening and night. 9 in the evening, bedtime always begins in the annex with an enormous hustle and bustle. Chairs are shifted, beds pulled out, blankets unfolded. Nothing stays where it is during the daytime. I sleep on a small divan, which is only 5 feet long, so we have to add a few chairs to make it longer. Comforter, sheets, pillows, blankets, everything has to be removed from Dussel's bed, where it's kept during the day. In the next room, there's a terrible creaking. That's Margot's folding bed is being set up. More blankets and pillows, anything to make the wooden slats a bit more comfortable. Upstairs, it sounds like thunder, but it's only Miss Van D's bed being shoved against the window so that Her Majesty, arrayed in her pink bed jacket, can sniff the night air through her delicate little nostrils. 9 o'clock. After Peter's finished, it's my turn for the bathroom. I wash myself from head to toe, and more often than not, I find a tiny flea floating in the sink. Only during the hot months, weeks or days, I brush my teeth, curl my hair, manicure my nails, and dab peroxide on my upper lip to bleach the black hairs. All of this is less than half an hour. 9:30, I throw on my bathrobe with soap in one hand and potty hairpins, panties, curlers, and a wad of cotton in the other. I hurry out of the bathroom. The next in line invariably calls me back to remove the gracefully curved but unsightful hairs that I've left in the sink. 10 o'clock, time to put up the blackout screen and say goodnight. For the next 15 minutes at least, the house is filled with the creaking of beds and the sigh of broken springs, and then, provided our upstairs neighbors aren't having a marital spat in bed, all is quiet. 11:30, the bathroom door creaks. A narrow strip of light falls into the room. Squeaking shoes, a large coat, even larger than the man inside it. Dussel is returning from his nightly work in Mr. Cougar's office. I hear him shuffling back and forth for 10 whole minutes, the rustle of paper from the food he's tucking away in his cupboards, and the bed being made. Then the figure disappears again, and the only sound is an occasional suspicious noise from the bathroom. Approximately 3 o'clock, I have to get up to use the tin can under my bed, which, to be on the safe side, has a rubber mat underneath in case of leaks. I always hold my breath while I go, since it clatters into the can like a brook down a mountainside. The potty is returned to its place, and the figure in the white nightgown, the one that causes Margot to exclaim every evening, "Oh, that indecent nighty," climbs back into bed. A certain somebody lies awake for about 15 minutes listening to the sounds of the night. In the first place, to hear whether there are any burglars downstairs, and then to the various beds upstairs, next door, and in my room, to tell whether the others are asleep or half awake. There is no fun, especially when it concerns a member of the family named Dr. Dussel. First, there's the sound of fish gasping for air, and this is repeated 9 or 10 times. Then the lips are moistened profusely. This is alternated with little smacking sounds, followed by a long period of tossing and turning and rearranging the pillows. After 5 minutes of perfectly quiet, the same sequence repeats itself 3 more times, after which he's presumably lulled himself back to sleep for a while. Sometimes the guns go off during the night between 1 and 4. I'm never aware of it before it happens, but all of a sudden I find myself standing beside my bed out of sheer habit. Occasionally I'm dreaming so deeply of irregular French verbs or a quarrel upstairs that I realize only when my dream is over that the shooting has stopped and that I've remained quietly in my room. But usually I wake up, then I grab my pillow and handkerchief, throw on my robe and slippers, and dash next door to Father, just the way Margot described in his birthday poem. When shots ring out in the dark of night, the door creaks open, and into sight come a hanky, a pillow, a figure in white. Once I've reached the big bed, the worst is over, except when the shooting is extra loud. 6:45, bring! The alarm clock, which raises a shrill voice at any hour of the day or night, whether you want it or not. Creak, wham! Miss Van D turns it off. Squeak! Mr. Van D gets up, puts on the water, and races to the bathroom. 7:15. The door creaks again. Dussel can go to the bathroom alone at last. I remove the blackout screen, and a new day begins in the annex. Yours, Anne. Thursday, August 5th, 1943. Dearest Kitty, today let's talk about the lunch break. It's 12:30. The whole gang breathes a sigh of relief. Mr. Van Martin, the man with the shady past and Mr. de Kock have gone home for lunch. Upstairs you can hear the thud of the vacuum cleaner on Miss Van D's beautiful and only rug. Margot tucks a few books under her arm and heads for the class for slow learners, which is what Dussel seems to be. Pym goes and sits in a corner with his constant companion Dickens, in hopes of finding a bit of peace and quiet. Mother hastens upstairs to help the busy little housewife, and I tidy up both the bathroom and myself at the same time. 12:45, one by one they trickle in. First Mr. Geese, and then either Miss Kleiman or Mr. Kruger, followed by Bep and sometimes even Miep. One clustered around the radio, they all listen rapidly to the BBC. This is the only time the members of the Annex family don't interrupt each other, since even Mr. Van Daan can't argue with the speaker. 1:15, food distribution. Everyone from downstairs gets a cup of soup plus dessert, if there happens to be any. A contented Mr. Geiss sits on the divan or leans against the desk with his newspaper cup, and usually the cat on his side. If one of the three is missing, he doesn't hesitate to let his protest be heard. Mr. Kleiman relates the latest news from town, and he's an excellent source. Mr. Kruger hurries up the stairs, gives a short but solid knock on the door, and comes in either wringing his hands or rubbing them in glee, depending on whether he's quiet and in a bad mood or talkative and in a good mood. 1:45, everyone rises from the table and goes about their business. Margot and Mother do the dishes. Mr. and Miss Van D head for the divan, Peter for the attic, Father for his divan, Russell too, and Anne does her homework. What comes next is the quietest hour of the day, when they're all asleep. There are no disturbances to judge by his face. Dussel is dreaming of food, but I don't look at him, because the time whizzes by, and before you know it, it's 4 p.m., and the pedantic Dr. Dussel will be standing with the clock in his hand because I'm 1 minute late clearing off the table. Yours, Anne. Saturday, August 7th, 1943. Dearest Kitty, a few weeks ago I started writing a story, something I made up from beginning to end, and I've enjoyed it so much that the products of my pen are piling up. Yours, Anne. Monday, August 9th, 1943. Dearest Kitty, we now continue with the typical day in the annex. Since we've already had lunch, it's time to describe dinner. Mr. Van Daan is served first and takes a generous portion of whatever he likes. Usually joins in the conversation, never fails to give his opinion. Once he's spoken, his word is final. If anyone dares to suggest otherwise, Mr. Van D can put up a good fight. Oh, he can hiss like a cat, but I'd rather he didn't. Once you've seen it, you know, never want to see it again. His opinion is the best. He knows the most about everything. Granted, the man has a good head on his shoulders, but it's swelled to no small degree. Madame, actually, the best thing would be to say nothing. Some days, especially when a foul mood is on the way, her face is hard to read. If you analyze the discussions, you realize she's not the subject, but the guilty party, a fact everyone prefers to ignore. Even so, you could call her the instigator, stirring up trouble. Now, that's what Miss Van Daan calls fun, stirring up trouble between Miss Frank and Anne. Margot and Mr. Frank aren't quite as easy. But let's return to the table. Miss Van D may think she doesn't always get enough, but that's not the case. The choicest potatoes, the tastiest morsels, the tenderest bit of whatever there is, that's Madame's motto. The others can all have their turn as long as I get the best. Exactly what she accuses Anne of doing. Her second watchword is keep talking. As long as somebody's listening, it doesn't seem to occur to her to wonder whether they're interested. She must think that whatever Miss Van Daan says will interest everyone. Smile coquettishly. Pretend you know everything. Offer everyone a piece of advice and mother them. That's sure to make a good impression, but if you take a better look, the good impression fades. One, she's heartbreaking. 2, cheerful. 3, coquettish. And sometimes a cute face. That's Petrella Van Daan. The third diner says very little. Young Mr. Van Daan is usually quiet and hardly makes his presence known. As far as his appetite is concerned, he's a dandine vessel that never gets full. Even after the most substantial meal, he can look you calmly in the eye and claim he could have eaten twice as much. Number 4, Margot, eats like a bird. She doesn't talk at all. She eats only vegetables and fruits. Spoiled in the opinion of the Van Daans. Too little exercise and fresh air in ours. Besides her, Mamma has a hearty appetite, does her share of the talking. No one has the impression, as they do with Miss Van Daan, But this is a housewife. What's the difference between the two? Well, Miss Van D does the cooking and Mother does the dishes and polishes the furniture. Numbers 6 and 7, I won't say much about Father and me. The former is the most modest person at the table. He always looks to see whether the others have been served first. He needs nothing for himself. The best things are for the children. He's goodness personified. Seated next to him in the annex is a little bundle of nerves, Dussel. Help yourself, keep your eyes on the food, eat and don't talk, and if you have to say something, then for goodness sake talk about food. That doesn't lead to a quarrel, just do bragging. He consumes enormous portions, and no is not part of his vocabulary, whether the food is good or bad. Pants that come up to his chest, a red jacket, black patent leather slippers, and horn-rimmed glasses. That's how he looks when he's at work at the little table, always studying and never progressing. This is interrupted only by his afternoon nap, food, and his favorite spot, the bathroom. 3, 4, or 5 times a day, there's bound to be someone waiting outside the bathroom door, hopping impatiently from one foot to the other, trying to hold it in and barely managing. Does Dussel care? Not a whit. From 7:15 to 7:30, from 12:30 to 1, from 2 to 2:15, from 4 to 4:15, from 6 to 6:15, from 11:30 to 12. You can set your watch by then. There are the times for his regular sessions. He never deviates or lets himself be swayed by the voice outside the door, begging him to open up before disaster occurs. Number 9 is not part of our annex family, although she does share our house and table. Bep has a healthy appetite. She cleans her plate and isn't choosy. Bep's easy to please, and that pleases us. She can be characterized as follows: cheerful, good-humored, kind, and willing.